Just 4 days and brand new proof of the mainstream media's collusion with the Clinton campaign to help Hillary. The evidence keeps piling up with each WikiLeaks drop. There are dozens of examples, but here are just a handful of the names in the liberal media who've been caught this week alone for their pro-Clinton bias. Glenn Thrush of Politico, George Stephanopoulos of ABC, John Harwood of CNBC, Donna Brazile, formerly with CNN, and Maggie Haberman and Mark Leibovich with the New York Times. Dana, let's start with you on this one. I mean, some of these things are pretty outstanding. Glenn Thrush, if I'm not mistaken, sent an email to Podesta saying, here's the piece I'm going to write. If you don't like something, let me know. I'll take it out.
Well, I've been a press secretary work since 1995. I imagine if you go back and found emails, especially when I was just starting out talking to reporters, if it's not unheard of for someone to send you an article and say, talk to your, this is based on the interview that we had, did I have anything wrong here? Because reporters don't like to get things wrong. That's unusual. It doesn't always happen. And also I found when I was actually in the White House, it was almost impossible to get a reporter to correct or change anything. So I agree some of this stuff looks bad, but I also know what it's like to be, at least on the press secretary side of things, trying to arrange interviews with reporters. And I have to say, if WikiLeaks, if the shoe were on the other foot, what kind of things would they find from conservative-leaning media to people like the Trump campaign?
Greg, you can't be all right with this. Okay? Are you all right with these?
Well, again, yeah. Imagine if the Trump emails were hacked. I mean, it would be a who's who of flag-waving fanboys, and we'd all be going like, "Oh man, oh geez, I hope they don't find mine." You know, so I said it yesterday. He that is without sin among us, you know, cast the first stone. There is media bias in here. I went through the entire list. We just named names, and we didn't give one single bit of evidence on that, just the names. But we know that, you know, out of this thick pile, I found like 3 pretty ugly things. I mean, you have Glenn Hutchins, you have Thrush, you have Brazile. But the other things are basically people kissing butt to get access. Like they're trying to get an interview. So they say, oh, you know what? Hillary looks really good. She looks really good. And maybe that'll help. There's a lot of that in this thing.
That's how I got suckered into granting an interview in January 2009 to a reporter who I will not name. But he has been in the deep freeze with me ever since because he called me and said he really wanted to do this exit interview with George W. Bush because he felt he'd had a raw deal. And he was going to set the record straight. And I said, wow, this is amazing. That would be great. It was a wire service. So I grant access. I go the full 9 yards. He gets to go to the Oval Office. That piece came out, and it was the worst piece, or you know what, I have ever seen.
Watch your mouth.
I felt so bad about falling for that, but that was how he got it. He convinced me that he was going to write this good piece, and so that sometimes that happens.
Okay. Can I add John Harwood to that?
I know. He knows
John
who he is.
Harwood was at least as bad as any of the rest of them. Sending emails to Podesta saying, hey, this is where I want to go with this. What do you think of this? I mean, it's ridiculous what Harwood did. I mean, so Donna Brazile gets fired from CNN for what she did, and rightly so. She should have. CNN got rid of her.
They're doing an investigation. We don't know what happened.
But some of these other ones, Glenn, I mean, Thrush saying, I'm a hack. Here's my piece. Tell me where I'm wrong. I mean, are you okay with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is what we've been talking about at this network for so long, about the mainstream media bias and media bias that is really prevalent. It's been focused on and highlighted in a really extraordinary way during this political process of the primaries and the general election. So, you know, all this is coming out. But again, I'm quite sure that there's some of this, you know, on the other side, people working or talking, and that, you know, to be fair. But nevertheless, this is what's being exposed, so maybe everyone's going to learn from it, and perhaps by airing their dirty laundry out, they're going to aspire to do better and more professional journalism.
Well, okay, one good thing about this whole email thing is this stuff has been around since the beginning of time. We know there's liberal bias. The emails act in a way like a flashlight in a dark alley, and now you're seeing all the rodents and everything happening. So it is helpful to know that we knew it exists.
We weren't crazy.
Yeah, we weren't crazy.
Can I draw a big distinction on some of these things? There should be a huge line here between the quote unquote the news journalist and the opinion journalist. Should there not be?
Absolutely.
Okay, and so talk to me about these examples we talked about here.
Well, I think what you see here is what Dana described, and I was just hoping Dana wasn't going to call me out at some point. I'm sure I was trying to win a curry favor.
No, I tried to get interviews. I tried to get you to come do interviews with Bush back then.
Well, I'm just saying, I think reporters are always trying to ingratiate themselves, left and right wing. That's just the truth. So Greg says, yes, there's a liberal bias. I don't think there's any question there's a liberal bias in most of American media. But let's stop for a second and think about two things I would ask you to pay attention to, Eric. One is, I just can't believe it, but I think the liberal and conservative media have just bought whole hog the idea of Russia leaking information to damage one candidate. One candidate. And I don't know how we get by that. I just think there's a corruption in there. And I know most people say, well, it's out there, Juan. What are you going to do with it? You can't ignore it. But I just think, wow, this is amazing. We're letting a foreign government influence our elections. Second thing to say is there's a whole industry that has really taken to Trump. I mean, I'm thinking about cable news, tweeting, partisan websites. Steve Bannon, who was running Breitbart, now runs his campaign. And there's, remember Ted Cruz's dad working for the assassinate JFK? That was all over the front of the National Enquirer. And you think about people like Peter Schweitzer, whose book Clinton Cash is now behind the whole FBI thing. Peter Schweitzer, Ed Klein, guilty as sin, Dick Morris, Dinesh D'Souza.
Hey, watch it.
With these mainstream, these liberal mainstream media outlets, in these emails exposing them with their contacts?
There's no question. I granted you your point in terms of that's wrong. They shouldn't do it. I think they're trying to ingratiate themselves for the most part. I don't know that they are lying or slanting news, because that would then call into question their own credibility. But in terms of like trying to, buddy up and I'm your friend and I really think your candidate has had a raw deal, as Dana was portraying, that happens with American press.
Man, we are cutting them a whole lot of slack. Well, these people call themselves news journalists. They're not the opinion types who may or may not have some opinions about, and maybe even contact campaigns, which they come out and say they have. Mm-hmm. These people allegedly are the straight journalists that say,
hey, they shouldn't contact campaigns?
Well, not offering them, editorial on their own pieces. I would think that would be a problem. And I think Donna Brazil's actions warranted exactly what she got.
What about like Corey Lewandowski? What about him? What is he doing? I mean, you have no problem with that? That he was getting paid by Trump?
He's a contributor, yes. And he's an opinion.
So he's getting paid by Trump while he was at CNN. I mean, like, we're going off on Brazil, but we don't talk about Corey.
I don't think anyone working for a campaign, working for the campaign, should be paid by a news organization. Unless you wildly point arrows saying, hey, working for the campaign, hello. And certainly the people we outlined in that full screen, none of them are that.
Can I point out one thing from Glenn Thrush, just to provide a little context. So at one point he sends an email to Jennifer Palmieri, she's a communications director for Clinton, and she writes back, he did me the courtesy of sending me what he is going to say about me. Seems fine. Meaning that he was saying, I did an interview with you, whether it's going to be good or bad, but giving her the courtesy because he's going to have to talk to her later on and they have to have a relationship. A lot of this stuff in these emails is about relationships, and again, the dark alley thing, I think that's a really good point. It's one of the reasons that press secretaries, you never, ever want to have an office in like an open setting, because when you talk to reporters, it can be just mortifying and embarrassing when you're trying to figure out what they're going to say about your boss, and you'll sometimes beg for them to tell you.
But I want to just push back on you. Juan brought up the other examples of the people on the right, but that's what 2016 is about. It's an equalizing pendulum. You've had one culture versus another, and for the past 4 decades, you've had pop culture, media, and academia create this massive liberal industrial complex. So when you mention all that new media, that's actually the pendulum, the normal required adjustment. To make it equal again, it's thumbing your nose at all of the last 4 decades. That's why it's been helpful and explains the visceral impulse to vote for Trump, is because he's leading the thumbing of the nose against identity politics.
You know what? I think that you're right, basically. Let me just start by saying that. But don't you think when you look at the fact that we are the #1 cable network, when Rush Limbaugh's the #1 talk radio show in America, when Drudge is up there, I guess, among the top websites in America. Breitbart has, gone out. It seems to me, wow, I don't think conservative points of view are in hiding or not.
But then what happens is they're not, because all of the other areas are taken. This is where this is one of the few avenues. You have talk radio, you have cable, Fox News.
Where they gravitate.
#1 cable, #1 radio, #1 website, Wall Street Journal, #1
one TV show.
You don't have several cable news networks who are competing for the same liberal talking points and the same liberal voice. You don't have how many newspapers in America lean left or are just blatantly left? I mean, there's the math. How many reporters have admitted, I think the number is something like 90% of reporters that were polled have donated to Democrats and something under 10% to conservative
That's possible. I don't know, but I think that's wrong.
There's an inherent bias just like on that side.
My point with this was, hey, these people aren't supposed to be doing this. They aren't supposed to have a liberal bias. They're supposed to be straight journalists. They're supposed to deliver the news. Listen, maybe I'm wrong.
No, I didn't say you're wrong. I think that you're onto something. I just want you to understand that Trump would never have come this far, Eric, if it's not for the tremendous exposure given to him by cable news of all sorts or the Russian leaks paid attention to by New York Times as well as Fox News. I just think, you know, there's a lot of support in the media that has elevated Trump. Vernon Jordan had a piece in the paper, Vernon Jordan, who was an advisor to Clinton, saying, you know what, the wall between entertainment, news, gone, and we've got to figure out what we're doing right now with the media because it's setting fire to people who tell lies, people who say anything. Experts are reviewed as idiots, and people who are trying to gain some advantage with one camp or another.
Somehow that's worse than the journalists that we just portrayed with a full screen. Somehow this what you call conservative bias is worse than news people. I don't know, just throwing their journalism card, burning it, ripping it up, saying, "Hey, I want to get in close because I want to make sure I have access to the candidate."
I think that you're right, but it's more than that. You've got to prove to me. You got to say these people are lying or they're slanting the news.
Well, if you read the Horowitz stuff, and I don't think that would pass in any newsroom across the country. Okay. All right, I'm going to leave right there.